Book name Kill the Boy and Let the Man Be Born, written and published by Dr. Prashant. Overview of the book. Kill the Boy and Let the Man Be Born. This book is a coming-of-age story about a young boy named Ethan, who faces a journey of transformation from childhood innocence to mature responsibility. Set in a small, rural town, Ethan's life is shaped by his encounters with hardship, loss, friendship, and self-discovery. Each chapter explores a pivotal moment that challenges Ethan to let go of his boyish fears and beliefs to grow into a man capable of courage, compassion, and resilience. The story emphasizes the emotional and moral struggles that shape Ethan, offering a universal message about growth and the importance of embracing life's challenges. Chapter 1. The Boy Who Dreamed. Ethan was a curious 12-year-old boy who lived in the small, quiet town of Willowbrook. His world was simple. He lived in a small cottage with his mother, a kind and hard-working seamstress who made beautiful clothes for the townspeople. While his mother worked, Ethan spent most of his time in their little backyard, gazing at the clouds or wandering through the woods that surrounded their home. To him, the world outside Willowbrook seemed full of adventure and excitement. Ethan had big dreams. He often sat under the old oak tree in the backyard, staring up at the stars and imagining faraway places. He dreamed of traveling the world, meeting strange people, and discovering hidden treasures. He read every book he could find about explorers and adventurers. He loved the idea of setting out into the unknown, where every day brought something new and exciting. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, Ethan sat by the window with a book in his lap. His mind wandered. What would it be like to sail across the ocean? Or climb the highest mountain? He wondered to himself. He closed his eyes and imagined himself standing on a sandy beach, feeling the warm breeze on his face and the salt of the ocean in the air. He could almost hear the sound of waves crashing on the shore. Ethan often talked about his dreams to his mother. She would smile gently, brushing a lock of hair away from his face. "One day, you'll do something great, Ethan," she would say. "But remember, it's not just the places you go that make you who you are. It's the person you become along the way." Ethan didn't fully understand his mother's words. He just knew he wanted to be more than what his small town seemed to offer. To him, Willowbrook was too quiet and too predictable. He longed for excitement, for adventure, for something bigger than the small routines of daily life. He wanted to see the world beyond the horizon. That evening, as Ethan lay in bed, he made a silent promise to himself. "One day, I will leave this town. I'll find the adventure I dream of. I'll make my mark on the world." His heart raced with excitement at the thought. Even though he was still just a boy, Ethan believed deeply in his dreams. He believed that if he worked hard enough, one day he would achieve them. But little did Ethan know, the journey he was about to begin wouldn't just be about traveling to faraway lands, it would be about the adventures inside himself, the challenges that would shape him into the man he was meant to become. As he closed his eyes that night, the stars twinkling outside his window, Ethan felt the first stirrings of the man inside him beginning to take shape. The dreams of adventure weren't just fantasies. They were the first steps towards something much greater. Chapter 2. Shadows of the Past. Ethan had always lived with the absence of his father. His mother, Anna, had never spoken much about him, except for a few quiet mentions of the man who had once been a soldier and then a carpenter. He knew that his father had died in an accident when Ethan was just a baby, but the details were always vague, leaving Ethan with a constant feeling of curiosity and a slight sense of emptiness. One evening, while Ethan was helping his mother fold clothes in their small living room, he decided to ask her more about his father. Anna paused, her fingers gently brushing the fabric of a shirt. She looked out the window for a moment, as though the memory of Ethan's father was a heavy thing that had been buried for many years. "Mom, what was he like?" Ethan asked quietly, his heart racing slightly. He had asked before, but this time he felt that it was important to know. Anna sighed deeply, sitting down on the old wooden chair by the fireplace. She motioned for Ethan to sit next to her. "He was a good man, Ethan," she began, her voice soft but filled with sadness. "But life is unpredictable. He was full of dreams like you. He wanted to build a life for us, but one day he didn't come home." Ethan's curiosity grew, but he could sense the sadness in his mother's voice. It wasn't the first time she'd spoken about his father with such pain, and Ethan felt a strange mix of anger and sadness inside. Why had he never been told more? Why hadn't anyone spoken more about the man who was supposed to be his father? "Do you miss him?" Ethan asked, his voice barely a whisper. Anna hesitated before answering. "I do in my own way, but I had to move on for you." Her eyes met his, and for the first time, Ethan saw how much she had carried on her own, how much she had sacrificed for him. Ethan felt a lump form in his throat. His mother had always been his rock, but hearing about his father made him realize how much she had been through. She had never remarried and had raised him alone, despite the challenges. That night, as Ethan lay in bed, he couldn't stop thinking about his father. Who was he really? What was his life like? Ethan felt an ache in his chest, wondering if there was something inside him that he had inherited from his father. Was he like him in any way? Was there a part of him that had been lost with his father's death? The next day, Ethan went to the attic, where his mother had said some of his father's things were kept. He had been there before, but this time he was determined to find something that would answer his questions. As he sorted through old boxes, he found a photograph of a young man in a military uniform, smiling at the camera. The man was handsome, with bright eyes that looked full of life. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He had never seen his father so clearly before. For the first time, Ethan felt the shadows of the past begin to lift, just a little. His father's image was no longer just a story, but a person, someone real. And for the first time, Ethan felt a small connection to the man he never knew. Chapter 3. The First Loss. Ethan had always been close to his dog, Rusty. Rusty wasn't just any dog. He was a stray that Ethan had found one rainy afternoon when he was about 8 years old. The dog was cold and hungry, and Ethan couldn't leave him out there. They quickly became inseparable. Rusty followed Ethan everywhere, to school, on walks through the woods, and even to the small creek near their home. Rusty was more than a pet. He was Ethan's best friend. One autumn, Rusty began acting strangely. He wasn't running around as usual, and he started sleeping more. Ethan thought it was just the cold weather, or maybe Rusty was getting old. But a few days later, Rusty disappeared. At first, Ethan wasn't too worried. Rusty had run off before, always coming back after a few hours or by the next day. But this time was different. Days passed, and there was no sign of him. Ethan searched everywhere. He asked neighbors, walked the woods, and called Rusty's name over and over. His mother tried to comfort him, saying that maybe Rusty had gone to find a new place to live or had wandered off to explore. But Ethan knew something wasn't right. The deep feeling in his chest told him that Rusty wasn't coming back. As the days turned into weeks, Ethan's sadness grew. He spent his evenings staring at the empty space where Rusty used to sleep, and he stopped going outside to play. His friends Tom and Lily tried to cheer him up, but nothing seemed to help. Ethan couldn't stop thinking about the dog he had loved for so long. He even started dreaming about Rusty, running through the woods, looking back, as if to say goodbye. One afternoon, as he sat on the porch, a neighbor, Mr. Henson, came by with a box in his hands. Inside the box, wrapped in a cloth, was something Ethan had been dreading. It was Rusty's collar. Mr. Henson explained that he had found it near the edge of the woods and thought Ethan would want it. The sight of the collar, still carrying Rusty's scent, made Ethan's heart ache. That night, for the first time, Ethan allowed himself to cry. He realized that losing Rusty wasn't just about losing a pet. It was the first real experience of loss in his life. Until then, he had been shielded from the harshness of the world, but now he understood that sometimes things, people, animals, even dreams were taken away without warning. In the days that followed, Ethan learned that loss was a part of life. It wasn't fair, it didn't make sense, and it hurt deeply. But he also began to understand that Rusty had been a gift. The time they had spent together, the adventures they'd shared, would stay with him forever. Even though Rusty was gone, the memories of their friendship would always be a part of Ethan. Ethan's first loss wasn't just about the pain. It was about learning to grow from it. He understood that loss was something everyone would face, and though it was hard, it also made him stronger. He knew now that in order to move forward, he had to keep going, even when things seemed broken. The boy who had once been afraid of life's harsh truths was slowly beginning to understand them. Chapter 4: A New Mentor. Ethan had always been a curious boy, eager to learn new things. But in the small town of Willowbrook, there weren't many people who could teach him much beyond what was taught in school. That all changed one afternoon when he met Mr. Grayson. Mr. Grayson was a retired carpenter who lived in a small, weather house on the edge of town. He was an old man with graying hair and thick glasses, always seen wearing a worn-out flannel shirt and boots covered in sawdust. Despite his age, Mr. Grayson had a twinkle in his eye that made him seem full of life and energy. It all started when Ethan, after hearing stories about Mr. Grayson from his friends, decided to visit him one afternoon. Ethan had always been fascinated by how things were built and imagined himself becoming a craftsman someday. He figured that if Mr. Grayson could teach him about carpentry, it would be like finding a treasure. When Ethan knocked on Mr. Grayson's door, the old man greeted him with a warm smile. "What brings you here, young man?" Mr. Grayson asked, his voice soft but friendly. Ethan explained his interest in learning how to work with wood. He had seen Mr. Grayson's work around town, beautiful chairs, tables, and even the wooden fence that surrounded the school playground. Mr. Grayson listened carefully and then invited Ethan to come back the next day to begin learning. The following day, Ethan arrived early, excited to start his lessons. Mr. Grayson handed him a small piece of wood and a carving knife. "Start by learning the feel of the wood," he said. "Every piece is different, and if you pay attention, it will tell you how to shape it." At first, Ethan found it difficult. The knife felt awkward in his hand, and the wood didn't seem to cooperate. But Mr. Grayson was patient, guiding him with gentle advice. It's not about forcing the wood to do what you want. It's about listening to it, understanding it. Ethan worked with Mr. Grayson for hours that day, learning not only how to carve wood, but also how to appreciate the art of patience. As the days passed, their bond grew. Mr. Grayson began to share more than just carpentry skills. He told Ethan stories of his life, how he had built his house with his own hands, the challenges he faced during hard times, and the lessons he had learned about perseverance and self-reliance. Through these stories, Ethan learned more than just technical skills. He learned about the importance of hard work, the value of mistakes, and the power of resilience. Mr. Grayson became not just a teacher, but a mentor who guided Ethan in understanding what it meant to be a man. Remember, Mr. Grayson would say, it's not about what you build on the outside, but what you build on the inside. That's what makes a man strong. Ethan didn't just learn how to craft furniture. He learned how to craft his own character. Mr. Grayson's influence help him realize that the journey of growing up was not just about learning skills, but about becoming a person who could face life's challenges with strength and grace. By the end of that summer, Ethan had changed. He wasn't the same curious boy who once wandered aimlessly, dreaming of adventure. He was now a boy who understood that the real adventure was in the growth and lessons that life had to offer, and he owed much of that to his new mentor, Mr. Grayson. Chapter 5. A Test of Courage. It was a quiet evening when Ethan first noticed something wasn't right with his little sister Lily. She was sitting in the corner of the kitchen, her face pale and her body shivering. At first, Ethan thought she might just be cold, but as he walked closer, he saw that she was burning with fever. "Lily, are you okay?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. Lily looked up at him with tired eyes and weakly shook her head. "I feel really sick, Ethan," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Ethan immediately ran to their mother's side, who was busy sewing clothes at the table. "Mom, Lily's really sick. We need to do something," he said, panic rising in his chest. His mother, always calm, stood up quickly. She felt Lily's forehead and frowned. "She has a high fever. We'll need to get some medicine from a doctor in the next town," she said, her voice steady but worried. The next town was about a 2-hour ride away, and the weather had turned dark and stormy. The wind howled, and the rain started pouring heavily. Ethan knew this would be no easy task, but there was no other choice. His mother couldn't go because she had to stay with Lily, and the roads would be too dangerous for her to travel on horseback alone. "Ethan, you're the only one who can do this," his mother said gently, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You need to get to the doctor, and fast." Ethan felt a wave of fear wash over him. The storm was fierce, and he had never ridden alone in such bad weather. The roads were muddy, and the trees around the path were bending dangerously in the wind. But looking at his sick sister, Ethan knew he had no other choice. He had to be brave. He had to do this for Lily. Without wasting any more time, Ethan quickly saddled up his horse, Thunder, a strong, reliable animal who had always been good to him. The rain came down harder, drenching him within minutes as he rode through the muddy fields and up the steep hills. Every few steps, Thunder slipped on the slick path, but Ethan urged him on, trying to ignore the fear that gripped his chest. The journey seemed endless. The wind howled in his ears, and the rain made it hard to see. But Ethan kept his focus on the road ahead. He thought about Lily, how she needed the medicine, how his mother was counting on him. Finally, after what felt like hours, Ethan reached the doctor's house. His heart was racing, and his clothes were soaked through. But he had done it. The doctor quickly gave him medicine and told him to hurry back, as Lily's condition was serious. Ethan thanked him and rushed back to the horse. The ride home was just as difficult, but this time Ethan felt stronger. His fear had turned into determination. He had faced the storm, faced the darkness, and had done what needed to be done. We finally reached home and handed the medicine to his mother. She hugged him tightly, tears in her eyes. "You did it, Ethan," she said, her voice full of pride. "You were brave." Ethan realized in that moment that courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was about doing what was right, even when it was hard. That night, as Lily rested peacefully, Ethan understood that he had taken the first step in becoming a man. Chapter 6. Betrayal of Friendship. Ethan had always thought of Tom as his best friend. They had been inseparable since childhood, sharing everything from secrets to dreams of what they would do when they were older. They would play for hours in the fields near Willowbrook, pretending to be explorers or superheroes, always laughing and making up stories. But as they got older, something started to change. It all started with a small disagreement, something that at first seemed like it would blow over. Tom had taken Ethan's favorite baseball cap without asking. It wasn't a big deal, but Ethan was upset. It wasn't the hat itself. It was the principle of it. He felt like Tom had disrespected him. When Ethan confronted him about it, Tom shrugged it off, saying it wasn't a big deal and that Ethan should just let go. But to Ethan, it felt like more than just the hat. It felt like Tom didn't care about their friendship as much as he used to. So, he told Tom he didn't want to hang out for a while. Tom didn't understand. He thought it was silly, but he agreed to give Ethan some space. The next week, things got worse. Ethan overheard a conversation between Tom and a few other kids at school. They were laughing and joking about how easy it was to trick Ethan into getting angry over something so small. They even made fun of how serious Ethan had been about the hat. Tom had turned their argument into a joke. Hearing that cut Ethan deeply. It felt like a knife had been twisted into his heart. How could Tom, his best friend, laugh at him behind his back? He had trusted Tom with his thoughts and feelings, and now it seemed like Tom didn't care at all. The betrayal was not just about the hat, but about the trust that had been broken. Ethan felt foolish for ever thinking that Tom truly cared about him. For the next few days, Ethan stayed away from Tom. He didn't want to face the hurt that Tom's words had caused. But despite the anger and sadness, he couldn't stop thinking about their friendship. Ethan knew that something important had changed between them. He felt betrayed, and he didn't know if he could ever go back to being the friends they once were. One afternoon, Tom came to Ethan's house. He seemed nervous, his usual confident smile replaced by an apologetic look. "Ethan, I'm sorry," Tom said quietly. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I never should have made fun of you. I was just trying to fit in with the other guys. I shouldn't have dragged you into it." Ethan stood in silence for a moment, unsure of how to respond. Part of him wanted to yell at Tom, to tell him how much he'd hurt him. But the other part of him knew that Tom was genuinely sorry. "I don't know if I can just forget about it," Ethan finally said, his voice thick with emotion. "But I'm willing to try." And that's when Ethan learned an important lesson about friendship. Sometimes, the people you trust the most can let you down, but forgiveness is a way to rebuild trust. It wasn't easy, but over time, Ethan and Tom worked through their differences. Their friendship was never the same, but in a way, it was stronger. Ethan realized that true friends don't just make each other happy. They help each other grow, even when things get tough. Chapter 7. The Burden of Guilt. Ethan had always admired Mr. Grayson, the old carpenter, for his skill and wisdom. The man had taught him many things about woodworking, patience, and life itself. One afternoon, they were working together in Mr. Grayson's workshop, crafting a beautiful wooden chair that would be sold to a neighbor. The shop smelled of sawdust, and the sound of tools was a familiar comfort to Ethan. Mr. Grayson was guiding Ethan through the final steps, showing him how to carefully sand the edges of the chair to make it smooth. Ethan's hands moved quickly, eager to impress his mentor. But as he reached for a new piece of sandpaper, his elbow knocked against a wooden shelf, causing a loud crash. The tools fell, and with them, a beautifully carved wooden box that had been in Mr. Grayson's family for generations. The box hit the floor with a soft thud, and when Ethan picked it up, he could see that one of its corners was badly chipped. His heart sank. The box wasn't just a simple decoration, it was a family heirloom, something Mr. Grayson treasured deeply. Ethan froze. A feeling of dread washed over him. He had never felt guilt like this before. It wasn't just that he had broken something precious, it was that he had done it by accident, and now there was no way to undo the damage. Mr. Grayson had trusted him, and he had let him down. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Grayson," Ethan said, his voice barely a whisper. He held the box carefully in his hands, feeling like it was the heaviest thing in the world. Mr. Grayson didn't immediately react. He simply stood there, his hands resting at his sides, his eyes studying the damage. For a long moment, Ethan couldn't tell what the old man was thinking. Then, Mr. Grayson finally spoke. "It's all right, Ethan," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Accidents happen. It's how we handle them that matters." But Ethan didn't feel all right. His mistake seemed so small, yet so huge in that moment. The guilt weighed on him like a heavy burden he couldn't shake off. How could he have been so careless? He had spent so many hours learning from Mr. Grayson, and now he had broken something that was irreplaceable. "Are you sure?" Ethan asked, his voice cracking. "I didn't mean to. I didn't want to hurt anything." Mr. Grayson smiled softly, placing a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "I know you didn't mean it, but sometimes, even when we don't mean to hurt something, it still happens. What's important now is to take responsibility for it." Ethan felt a knot in his stomach. Taking responsibility meant admitting his mistake fully, without making excuses. Mr. Grayson had trusted him, and now it was up to Ethan to show that he was a man who could own up to his actions. "I'll fix it," Ethan said, his voice firm with resolve. "I'll do whatever it takes to make it right." Mr. Grayson nodded. "That's all anyone can do. Own your mistakes, learn from them, and move forward." The guilt didn't disappear right away, but over time, Ethan learned that it wasn't something to run from. It was a feeling that could teach him important lessons. Through his mistakes, he would grow stronger and wiser. And as he worked with Mr. Grayson to repair the box, Ethan realized that facing his mistakes was the first step toward becoming a true man. Chapter 8. A Man's Choice. In this chapter, Ethan faces a life-changing decision that will test his maturity and the lessons he has learned so far. The opportunity comes when he is offered a chance to leave his small town of Willowbrook and attend a prestigious school in the city. This school promises a brighter future, with the possibility of a better education and more opportunities than Willowbrook could ever offer. The decision seems exciting at first, but as Ethan thinks about it, he begins to feel torn. Ethan has always dreamed of leaving Willowbrook. He imagined going to a big city, meeting new people, and learning things he couldn't in his small town. He pictured himself achieving greatness, just like the adventurers in the books he read as a child. This chance is the first step toward the future he's always wanted. However, as he considers the offer, he realizes that going to the city means leaving behind everything he's known: his family, his friends, and the life he's built in Willowbrook. Ethan's mother, who has always been his greatest supporter, tells him that this is an opportunity he should not miss. She reminds him that she worked hard to raise him, and she believes he is capable of achieving great things. But deep down, Ethan knows that leaving would mean stepping away from the people who depend on him. His younger sister Lily still needs him at home, and he feels a responsibility to be there for her. His bond with Mr. Grayson, who has taught him so much, also weighs heavily on his heart. Ethan realizes that staying in Willowbrook would allow him to continue helping these people, to be there when they need him most. The decision becomes more difficult as Ethan spends more time thinking about it. The city offers excitement, freedom, and a chance to grow, but Willowbrook offers love, connection, and a sense of purpose. He begins to understand that making a choice is not just about chasing dreams. It's about balancing those dreams with the responsibilities he has at home. Ethan spends days weighing his options. He goes on long walks, talks to his friends, and asks Mr. Grayson for advice. He starts to understand that a man's choice is not always clear-cut. A man must decide what is truly important to him, even if it means making sacrifices. Ethan is no longer the boy who dreamed of running away to seek adventure. He is becoming someone who understands that true courage is about making difficult decisions, even when there is no perfect answer. In the end, Ethan decides to stay in Willowbrook. He chooses to continue supporting his family, helping his community, and growing at his own pace. He realizes that becoming a man is not about escaping to the unknown, but about embracing the challenges and responsibilities that life throws his way. By making this choice, Ethan finally understands that the journey to manhood is not just about following dreams, but also about staying grounded in the reality of life's duties. This chapter teaches the important lesson that growth and maturity often come from making tough decisions that require sacrifice. Ethan's choice reflects his transformation from a boy who only thought of himself to a young man who is ready to take on the world with responsibility and purpose. Chapter 9. The Farewell. As the day of Ethan's departure from Willowbrook grew nearer, a heavy feeling settled in his heart. He had always dreamed of leaving the small town for something bigger, but now that it was actually happening, it was harder than he expected. He was not just leaving behind his childhood home, but everything he had known, his friends, his family, and the familiar paths he had walked since he was a boy. Ethan spent his last few days in Willowbrook, visiting the places that had meant so much to him over the years. First, he walked to the old oak tree by the river. This tree had always been a secret spot, where he'd sit for hours reading books and dreaming of far-off places. It felt strange to stand there, knowing he would soon be far away. He placed his hand on the rough bark and whispered, "Goodbye, old friend." The tree, of course, didn't respond, but in that quiet moment, Ethan realized that he was saying goodbye to more than just a place. He was letting go of the boy who had always believed the world was small and simple. Next, he visited Mr. Grayson's house. The old carpenter had been like a grandfather to him, teaching him life, lessons that Ethan would carry with him forever. As Ethan knocked on the door, Mr. Grayson opened it with a smile, but his eyes were filled with sadness. "I'll miss you, Ethan," he said, pulling him into a tight hug. "You've grown into a fine young man, but don't forget the value of hard work and the wisdom that comes with patience." Ethan felt a lump in his throat. He had learned so much from Mr. Grayson, and now he realized that leaving was a way of closing a chapter in his life. Finally, Ethan went to visit his mother, who was sitting on the porch with a basket of clothes. She looked up at him with a soft smile, but there was a sadness in her eyes too. "Are you ready to go, my boy?" she asked, her voice gentle but firm. Ethan nodded, though the thought of leaving her behind made him want to turn around and stay. He had always relied on her, and now he had to step out on his own. "Remember," his mother said, "being a man isn't about being far from home. It's about remembering where you came from and carrying it with you in everything you do." Ethan hugged her tightly, feeling a wave of gratitude wash over him. He didn't realize how much he had taken his mother's strength for granted until now. As the day came to a close, Ethan stood at the edge of Willowbrook, looking back at the town one last time. The sun was setting, casting a warm orange glow over the fields. It felt like the town was saying goodbye to him too, as if the very air had a bittersweet feeling. With a deep breath, Ethan turned away and walked towards the train station. He knew that this farewell was just one part of his journey. The boy he once was had to say goodbye so that the man he was becoming could move forward. And so, with a heart full of memories and hope, Ethan boarded the train and left Willowbrook behind, ready for the new life that awaited him. Chapter 10. The Man Who Was Born. The final chapter begins with Ethan standing at the edge of the Willowbrook train station, feeling both nervous and excited. He's about to leave the town that has been his home for so many years. The old station, with its faded signs and worn-out benches, suddenly feels like a place filled with memories. This moment marks the end of his childhood and the beginning of something new. He's no longer the boy who dreamed of adventure from his bedroom window, but a young man stepping out into the world on his own. As the train approaches, Ethan takes a deep breath, looking around at the familiar faces of his family and friends. His mother, though proud, has tears in her eyes. His little sister, Lily, hugs him tightly, promising to write. Tom, his best friend, stands a little further back, awkwardly trying to smile despite their recent fallout. Even though their friendship has been strained, there's a silent understanding between them. Ethan knows that the journey to becoming a man involves letting go of some things like the past and making peace with the people who shaped him. The train finally arrives, its whistle cutting through the silence. Ethan grabs his small suitcase, which holds not much more than clothes, books, and memories. But what's more important is the feeling inside him, the mix of uncertainty and hope. He knows the world outside Willowbrook is vast and full of possibilities, but it also holds challenges that he may not be ready for. Still, he is determined to face whatever comes. As Ethan boards a train, he looks out the window one last time. The town he's leaving behind isn't just a place, it's a collection of moments that made him who he is today. He remembers the long walks with Mr. Grayson, the lessons about life and work. He remembers his mother's quiet strength, always there for him, even when he didn't fully understand her sacrifices. He remembers Rusty, the dog he lost, and how he learned that not everything is in his control. He remembers the stormy night when he had to find the courage to help Lily, and how that experience changed him forever. Ethan's heart swells with gratitude as the train slowly pulls away from the station. He understands now that growing up isn't just about leaving behind the things that are familiar. It's also about taking what you've learned from those things and using them to build the life you want. Becoming a man doesn't mean you have all the answers. It means you have the strength to make decisions, to face your fears, and to carry the lessons of the past with you as you move forward. The train starts picking up speed, and with each passing mile, Ethan feels a little more like the person he's meant to be. The boy he once was is still with him, but the man he's becoming is starting to take shape. The world ahead of him is uncertain, but he feels ready. Ready to face the challenges. Ready to live the dreams he once imagined. As the train disappears into the distance, Ethan knows that this is just the beginning. He's on his way to becoming the man he was always meant to be. This ending encapsulates Ethan's transformation, not just physically but emotionally and mentally, as he steps into adulthood with the lessons learned from his past. It is hopeful and full of quiet strength, echoing the central theme of growth and the inevitable passage from boyhood to manhood.